Closer Storm is now available on all video-on-demand platforms.
One claims it's the company's only chance for survival.
Atari has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The 31-year-old
TWA presents the difference between...
Kodak is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection.
What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and welcome to the 11th episode of Bankrupt. I've talked about the phenomenon on themed entertainment franchises popping up around North America in the 1990s. Whether it was a restaurant chain like Planet Hollywood or an indoor virtual theme park like Disney Quest, none ever seemed to last very long. Disney Quest was infamously dragged on to its eventual death, and Planet Hollywood is hanging on by a thread, at least for its original restaurant concept. But there was another early 90s franchise that was meant to take on giants like Chuck E. Cheese. A massive entertainment space filled with mazes, ball pits, slides, all packaged inside one facility called Discovery Zone. And while that name may dig up some nostalgia for some, the chain barely made it past a decade despite its early success. So join me as I find out what happened to this icon of the 90s, Discovery Zone. This episode of Bankrupt is sponsored by Brilliant. Sign up for free today by going to brilliant.org/BrightSunFilms. The first 200 people to use that link will get 20% off an annual premium subscription. It all began in 1989 with an entrepreneur named Jim Jorgensen. He had been creating companies through the 1970s and 80s with little to moderate success. As a fitness enthusiast, Jim opened the first location in Kansas City, Missouri under the name Discovery Zone. Jim and his business partner marketed it as not just a restaurant or a daycare, but a dynamic children's recreation center that was formatted in such a way that children would get exercise by playing in the elaborate indoor playground. Within the colorful 15,000 square foot building would be ball pits, rolling slides, and tubed climbing structures. This first location was a massive hit, and by the next year, Jim was already looking to expand. Discovery Zone Incorporated was set up and began putting ads in the paper for the opportunity to franchise this idea. This aggressive growth strategy resulted in 15 new locations within just a year and a half. However, restaurant giant McDonald's decided they wanted a slice of this new market. In 1991, McDonald's announced Leaps and Bounds, a children's indoor play center that pretty much was a carbon copy of Discovery Zone. It's gotta be pretty scary when one of the largest companies in the world decides they want your market share, and in response to this, Discovery Zone once again embarked on a massive expansion campaign. Now with over 100 locations across the United States, major companies began to take notice. In early 1993, another massive corporation of the time, Blockbuster, took a 21% stock interest into Discovery Zone, worth around $10 million. By June of that year, they had brought their company public on NASDAQ with a very successful IPO. On day one, their stock shot up around $13, earning the company over $55 million. With the appeal of future growth, a partnership of sorts with Blockbuster and its parent company Viacom was made in 1994. In the same year, Discovery Zone purchased all the remaining assets of Leaps and Bounds from McDonald's, as they had essentially decided to give up. Not only did McDonald's sell their locations to them, but they also acquired stock in Discovery Zone. So I think there was a clear winner on that battle. By the conclusion of that year, and with this new acquisition, Discovery Zone had 347 locations across America, Canada, and Puerto Rico. By the looks of it from the outside, Discovery Zone was an immensely successful brand. What the public didn't know, however, was that this was going to be their all-time peak. While their growth was undoubtedly exponential, they still ended 1994 with a $10 million loss. However, in that year, the major investor in Discovery Zone, that being Blockbuster, had exercised their original contract with them to buy even more stock within the company. Blockbuster, and by extension Viacom, had taken controlling interest in Discovery Zone with 50.1% of shares. Viacom had already been impressed by their initial growth and huge capture of the seemingly growing market. With potential for overseas expansion into Europe and use of in-house IP characters like Nickelodeon and Paramount at their locations, obviously Viacom saw a great future for this young brand. However, this also meant that this was no longer an independently run entity. With their new corporate owners, in May of 1995, the changes were already beginning to be felt, as several key executives at Discovery Zone were fired and replaced by longtime Blockbuster staff. Suddenly, the management at Discovery Zone was changing. With future plans for a new subsidiary brand geared more for families and parents, much like Dave & Buster's, internally, financial issues were becoming more and more of an issue. Discovery Zone's rapid expansion in the early 90s did a great job at building brand awareness and securing their place in the market, but also caused them to lose sight of just how much money was going out the door to fuel this growth. With the majority of their focus placed on new development, the quality control of their existing stores began to fade, and customers began to take notice. This diminishing customer satisfaction resulted in lower cash flow at their facilities, which started to affect the company's overall bottom line. This, paired with the slow weekday foot traffic, had devastating effects to the company's debt, and suddenly they had no way to pay it off. With apparently no interjection of cash from Viacom, Discovery Zone filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in March of 1996. Discovery Zone had well over $350 million in debt. The company soon began to reorganize in hopes of exiting this bankruptcy. However, this was the beginning of the end. By the next year, private investment firms began showing interest in purchasing the company. However, with Discovery Zone bleeding up to $5 million every month, the dying company didn't receive the bailout it needed at the time. While some aspects of their locations were revamped, like new laser tag arenas, the money just wasn't coming in. By now, Viacom had exited their deal, writing a $50 million loss from the company just as Discovery Zone began to be undercut by new knockoff family entertainment centers. This was also while Chuck E. Cheese was growing even more, taking vital cuts of their market share. In 1998, a private equity firm named Wellspring Associates LLC had purchased the controlling interest in DZ and brought them out of bankruptcy. With focus now on revamping their existing locations and adding more play sections like arts and crafts rooms and kids karaoke stages, their hopes were perhaps a little high for this bleeding corporation. The indoor entertainment landscape and what kids actually wanted to have fun with was always changing. With technology like video games becoming more and more popular amongst DZ's demographics, the race to keep up was costly. But to their credit, they did try. Ultimately, this pipe dream of a successful future was soon thrusted back into reality when in April of 1999, Discovery Zone once again re-entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. This time, upon the announcement, over 100 locations were abruptly shut down. Both employees and guests showed up to their locations with a sign on the door saying the store was closing effective immediately. Discovery Zone had just renovated over 60% of their stores, paid licensing for IP like Men in Black and Godzilla, and had over 5,000 employees on payroll. CEC Entertainment, the company who owns Chuck E. Cheese, purchased a number of these closing stores and tried their best to accommodate families who were canceled. Things only got worse by June of the next year, as their bankruptcy court judge had ruled there was no feasible way for Discovery Zone to re-enter profitability, and their bankruptcy was converted to Chapter 7, which means liquidation. So, through this time and into 2001, all remaining 200 locations were liquidated and closed forever. Discovery Zone had been completely dissolved. In the end, Discovery Zone was a product of its time, like many franchised entertainment centers of the early 1990s. cities. And just like those other companies of the time, like Planet Hollywood, their expansion was so rapid and so aggressive that they lost sight of if there's even a broad market for this type of facility and how long that would even last. Now, to be fair, Chuck E. Cheese and their parent company are doing well and just recently raised over $500 million. They're proof that the business model does work at a wide scale. Where Discovery Zone went wrong is when their huge expansion campaigns caused them to lose sight of their existing locations. They were spending hundreds of millions of dollars building these new locations from loans, while also allowing their existing locations to decline in quality and customer care. As they found out, that's a poor combination and ultimately led to their significant drop in cash flow. Viacom and Blockbuster never really lived out their licensing dream with the company, and just as quickly as they took control and fired their existing executive team, they dropped the company and essentially any hope of it rebounding. But keep in mind, they could have injected more money into the brand and easily brought it out of bankruptcy. After all, they bought the controlling ownership, so it was their responsibility. It really is crazy though, how in such a short time the company was founded and built 347 fun centers in just 5 years. And just 7 years later, the entire company was bankrupt and gone. Today, pretty much every Discovery Zone location has now been demolished, revamped, or turned into a Chuck E. Cheese. Pretty much all traces of Discovery Zone are now gone. The company began in the late 80s with one simple purpose, and that was to help boost the activity of young children in North America. It became a massive brand in a very short time, and I'm sure for many of you who grew up during this era remember visiting Discovery Zone. It's nostalgic to look back upon, and if approached correctly, could have been an enormous success story, completely changing the landscape of the retail market and very well could have been thriving today. But instead, it became a cautionary tale. Understanding the finance world is hard. Really, it all boils down to math, and for those of you who want to get started in learning about the connections between money and math, today's sponsor Brilliant is the perfect place to do so. There you can find finance and exponents, just one course out of 80 within complex numbers. A simple yet comprehensive way to understand the fundamentals of math and even more complex concepts. But even if you're interested in other subjects like science, Brilliant gives you the tools to reach your intellectual aspirations. I'm kind of a person who is obsessed with learning new things, and I think Brilliant does a great job at giving me the tools to solve new and unfamiliar problems by using critical reasoning skills. But what I love about it is that it's palatable and not too intimidating. There's a lot of value in that. After all, it's better to understand these concepts rather than just blindly memorize the equations, which is exactly what I did in school. If you want to learn more about Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/BrightSunFilms to sign up for free. If you're one of the first 200 people to use that special link, you will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. My name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.